Welcome to the second part of Chapter 9. Once the parties have decided where in the value chain to link, have selected a partner, and have chosen the type of strategic alliance they want to form, then it's time to negotiate a contract. While contracts are no doubt important and legally binding, it's important to recognize that no contract, no matter how detailed and carefully thought out, will replace the manager's goodwill and ability to get along. And we'll talk about the importance of commitment and trust at the end of this chapter. Formal alliances may require a separate organizational unit housed in one of the companies with employees from both, and that might be specified in the contract. Joint ventures, because they are a separate legal entity, they're going to be a separate organization, and the contract negotiations are going to reflect this structure and the importance placed on carrying out the alliance's objectives and making sure each partner's interests are upheld. Two of the important things that must be considered in negotiating a contract are regarding decision-making control and the management structure. Very often, considerations are going to also be made for what would happen in the case of the dissolution of the alliance, like a prenup agreement. Decision-making structures apply to two types of decisions: operational decisions, which apply to the day-to-day operations of the organization, as well as strategic decisions, which apply to the long-term objectives of the organization or the alliance. Managerial decision-making power is usually based on each parent's skill, not necessarily percent of ownership. So majority owners are not necessarily going to control all of the operations. It depends what the strategic objective of the partnership is. If a local company is partnering or forming an alliance with a foreign company to gain access to managerial know-how, it wouldn't make any sense not to allow the foreign partner to take dominant point in these types of decisions. In non-equity alliances, strategic decisions typically remain with the parent companies. But in joint ventures, strategic decision-making will take place at the level of the joint venture. Of course, individuals from the parent companies might make up the management team of the joint venture and will focus on making sure that the objectives of their parent organizations are upheld. The decision-making is still going to happen at the joint venture level independently of the parents. Your textbook identifies 5 different management structures. The first one is a dominant parent structure. This is likely to happen if one partner has a dominant equity position or is more important. In joint ventures in countries with a high degree of government intervention, this might also be the case if the host country government insists majority ownership for the host country partner. In this type of structure, decision-making, both strategic and operational decision-making, will be dominated by one of the partners. A shared management structure is one in which both parent companies contribute about the same number of management to the alliance organization. This results in shared control. This is desirable when partners have similar technologies and know-how and contribute equally. It's important to acknowledge that this has the potential to increase conflict because of potentially competing interests of the both parent organizations. A split control management is one in which strategic decisions are shared, but functional decisions occur independently based on each partner's expertise. This might be driven by a desire to not completely share a skill or a unique technology. For example, if the partners have different technologies but contribute equally to the alliance, a split management structure is preferred. The fourth approach is an independent management structure. In this format, alliance managers act more like managers from a separate company. This is likely in mature joint ventures, when joint venture managers have complete decision-making autonomy and are at times even recruited from outside the parent companies. This is more likely when the market is expanding, the venture doesn't require much capital, or the venture doesn't require much R&D input from the parent organizations. In those cases, independent management structures would be appropriate. The final model is one of rotating managers. This is a structure in which managers from the partners rotate through key position in the management hierarchy. This is popular in developing countries because it serves as a way to train management talent and transfer expertise from foreign partners. Of course, an alliance might start with one management structure and then transition to a different management structure as the alliance matures. And the management structure that's selected is going to depend on the degree of contribution to the alliance and the strategic goals of the alliance. If you remember our discussion from previous chapters regarding control mechanisms, structure is important as a formal control mechanisms, but informal control mechanisms like culture, like social ties formed through global teams are equally important for controlling operations at different subsidiaries or alliances. Once a contract is in place and the venture can start its operations, it's important to dedicate time to building commitment and trust among the partners. Lack of mutual trust and lack of commitment to the joint venture or to the alliance and to each of the partners is likely to lead to failure. The ways in which partner organizations might demonstrate their commitment is by engaging in fair financial transactions, their commitment to support the partner's strategic goals, not just their own, commitment to the partner's employees and their development, and commitment to understanding the partner's culture and the political and economic situation in the host country. Here we're talking about a conscious effort to learn about the partner, not just from the partner. Of course, learning from the partner is a stated objective in many of the strategic goals for different forms of alliances. But learning about one's partner is a way to build commitment and trust. Attitudinal commitment is a psychological identification with the partnership or a pride of association with the other partner. When attitudinal commitment is present, fair exchange is possible. When the partners have high level of attitudinal commitment, they are going to be more willing to dedicate resources and efforts and face risks to make the alliance work. Calculative commitment is a more practical type of commitment. Each partner can have different goals, but that is not necessarily important. What's important is that both partners can meet their objectives and get what they want out of the alliance, whatever drove them to join the alliance. A lot of studies have looked at different levels of commitment in alliances and joint ventures more specifically. And they suggest that as commitment increases, both partners are more likely to achieve their strategic goals from the alliance. Trust and commitment go together, and it's necessary to understand the importance of trust and commitment and the fact that this is not going to happen overnight. It's important to build trust and commitment in these types of alliances. We've also talked about the importance of building cohesiveness and trust in global teams, and that best practices recommend teams meet face-to-face regularly because it is hard to build commitment over email. It's hard to build trust over email. People are likely to be suspicious at first and ask themselves whether or not the other partner seeks to steal their technology or try to take them over. Maybe by partnering with this company, we're creating a new competitor. Are we giving away too much information? Are we too trusting? Is the partner going to give us what we agreed upon? All these questions are likely to undermine trust. And so organizations have to engage in conscious efforts to build trust and commitment. Credibility trust is the confidence that the partner has the intent and the ability to meet the promised obligations and commitments, whereas benevolent trust is the confidence that the partner will behave in goodwill and fair exchange. Successful cooperation means that both alliance partners have to contribute quality inputs to the organization. And that does not apply just to financial resources, but also to human resources. A joint venture, for example, cannot be used to offload Surf Blast staff to find them positions in the joint venture. People have to be placed in a joint venture or in an alliance because they possess the skills necessary for those alliances to be successful. When there's no trust, partners are going to hold back information and might be inclined to take unfair advantage of each other. This is going to precipitate failure. Formal contracts, while important, cannot substitute for a trusting relationship. And it's also important to recognize that tacit knowledge can only be shared when there's trust. Tacit knowledge is different from explicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is knowledge that is very easy to share. Knowledge that you can put in a manual, for example, is explicit knowledge. How do I use Excel? How do I create formulas in Excel? That's an example of explicit knowledge. I can easily transfer that piece of knowledge to you by writing a manual. Tacit knowledge is more sticky knowledge. It's knowledge that is harder to transfer. You gain tacit knowledge through interactions, through participation, through active engagement. And tacit knowledge cannot be transferred if their trust is lacking. And so to build and sustain trust and commitment, multinationals should select their partners very carefully. Not just look at what resources the partner can contribute, and not just look at strategic complementarity. Need to also believe that mutual commitment to the alliance is possible. Knowing each other's strategic goals is also a way to build trust. If each partner is aware of what the other party's goals are and respects those goals and works towards ensuring that each partner meets their goals, trust is more likely. Of course, goals can evolve throughout the life of a partnership, and that's important to remember. Seeking win-win situations in which both parties can benefit is a way for trust to evolve. It's important to recognize that trust building takes time, and so going slow can benefit us in the long run. Investing in cross-cultural training is a way to build trust. That's the point I was making earlier regarding learning about your partner, not just from your partner. If you develop your cross-cultural intelligence and your language skills, this is likely to reduce cross-cultural miscommunication and distrust, and likely to show goodwill and your desire and your commitment to the relationship, which is potentially going to increase trust. Investing in direct communication is also important. Face-to-face meetings are essential to building trust. There is value in virtual meetings. We've discussed this already in Chapter 8, but face-to-face meetings need to happen periodically if it's important to the parties to build trust. Once the venture or the alliance is in place and operating, it's important to conduct performance evaluations to make sure that the strategic goals of each of the partners are met. Joint ventures often become standalone profit centers, and so they might be evaluated mostly according to their financial contribution, right? So return of investment or return on assets. But the contributions can very often also be intangible or indirect, and that makes it harder to measure them. Intangible contributions could be developing new technologies, entering risky markets, learning new markets or learning new technologies, overcoming local political barriers, or developing presence in a new challenging market. It's important to consider criteria other than financial criteria, like organizational learning or any other subjective measures like satisfaction from the partnership and harmonious operations. Joint ventures in China have a relatively higher failure rate as a result of misunderstandings regarding the evolution of the Chinese partner's intent. We talked about the fact that the strategic objectives for a partnership can evolve as the partnership matures. While Chinese firms or entities at first might be interested in acquiring new technologies or managerial know-how, as the venture matures, the Chinese partners might seek more independence in terms and higher profits. And this can lead to conflict if the foreign partner is not prepared for that change in strategic objectives. And so if the alliance doesn't work, or if one of the partners feels that they are not getting the strategic objectives that they intended to get out of the partnership, they have two options. They can end the partnership, or they can try to intervene and improve the relationship. It's important to know when to get out of the partnership and stop investing if the partnership doesn't yield the desirable results. The term escalation of commitment refers to a situation in which the partnership is no longer yielding the results for which the partners entered the partnership, but they fail to recognize that and continue investing into the partnership. That's an example of escalation of commitment in alliances. The prenuptial agreements that we've discussed earlier are a way to make exiting the alliance easier and more harmonious if many of the terms have been established. In joint ventures, sometimes one of the parents will acquire the joint venture and become a wholly owned subsidiary. The video on your As You Learn page of the NUMI plant, which was a partnership between Toyota and GM, resulted in Toyota acquiring the plant and it becoming a wholly owned subsidiary. In spite of the many challenges that we identified in this chapter to building successful alliances, many organizations will continue to use those as a faster and more efficient and flexible way to enter new markets. Many companies actually develop strategic alliance units within their organizational structures to learn from and develop processes and procedures to help managers form strategic alliances. Research evidence suggests that multinationals with strategic alliances outperform multinationals without them, and that's usually the case for large multinationals that can dedicate the necessary resources to establish such alliances. Much of this research seeks to develop key lessons, best practices in cross-border alliances to improve the performance of alliances and reduce failures. Some of those best practices include understanding and appreciating business and cultural differences. This is the idea of learning about your partner, not just from your partner. Making sure that there's strong executive support for the alliance. Investing in communication, being aware of cross-cultural communication, identifying a shared language, ensuring there's opportunities for face-to-face communication, not just virtual communication. Dedicate the necessary time to develop commitment, trust, and dedication. Have checkpoints, regular reviews of the alliance to make sure that it is meeting the objectives of each of the partners.